Hi guys, it's Rob from Royal Balls. Another video today on that highly emotive topic on handling our hatchlings. A lot of robust discussion in the comments section, so today I want to clear up some misconceptions, some assumptions, and talk about some of the science behind this actual experiment. This is Tiger. He is a pastel banana Enchi warmer, and he is 10 years old. This guy is actually the father of one of my first ever clutches. I do have a couple of normal females which are probably 11 years old by now. I still have those females in my collection, so I do have long-term relationships with my snakes. This guy is still around, and this was originally my son's snake, and he's been housed in an aquarium, he's been housed in a terrarium, he's been housed in a fully furnished terrarium, he's been housed in a variety of different tubs, he's been handled to death, he's been on hunger strike for months at a time, and this guy is none the worse for wear. You can see that he is not shy and fearful. He's ended up in exactly the same place as all my other ball pythons, while teaching me an awful lot about ball pythons along the way. You can tell how old he is because he has a name. I used to name all of my collection. I no longer do that. So yes, I have been breeding ball pythons for about 10 years. This is the third snake that I ever bought. It's a male, and I still have the two original females who are now about 11 years old. This is Sarah, an 11-year-old normal. She is the mother of my first ever clutch of ball pythons, and yes, I still have her in my collection. I actually keep a couple of normal girls in the collection and use them sparingly for proving out genes when I'm not sure what's in a powerhouse male, whether he's bought or whether I've produced him. A normal can be extremely useful for reverse engineering the genes in a particular snake if you're not sure what's in him. So this is Sarah. She is around about 11 years old. She's been living in a tub all her life. And yes, she does get the opportunity to free roam with my other snakes. So this is Grandma. I do actually keep a variety of snakes still. This is a Mexican black king snake. I do have a number of king snakes. I've also kept large snakes. I've kept retics. This is Annie in the photograph. She's now at ARP Constrictors in his breeding team. She got too big. Took up too much space. When she got to about 16 feet and about 120 pounds, she needed a bigger space. I've also kept Burmese, I've kept anacondas, I have a couple of warmer pythons, I have green tree pythons. So over that 10 years I have kept a lot of snakes. Still do keep quite a variety, but ball pythons for me is where it's at. It's actually quite warm in here. I've turned off the fans so that you don't get the hum in the background on the video. But let's just talk a little bit about some science. I am a scientist. I do have a lot of those fancy letters after my name which I've never used, but it does give me an advantage in that I am familiar with both reading and writing scientific papers, and I am familiar with scientific protocol. So in this experiment here on handling, which is a very subjective topic, what do we actually mean by handling and what do we expect to see from it? How are our snakes improved, or how do they get better by handling? These are all very subjective things that are very difficult to actually measure. So as a scientist, one of the first things that we need is a control population. It's no good just performing an experiment on a snake and saying handling has made it better. Better than what? Better than a snake that has not been handled. So we need a control sample. Why is that important? Well, let me give you a real world example that will probably hit home to many after the pandemic. When we test a new medication, it's no good just giving the medication to a bunch of sick people and seeing whether they get better. If you give medication to all those sick people and they get better, you tend to think the medicine worked. But if you have a control population and you compare all those sick people that you gave the medication to with a bunch of sick people that you didn't give the medication to, and they all got better, that gives you a slightly different answer from the first one where we didn't have a controlled sample. Having a control sample and seeing that they all get better, or in this case, that they all improve at the same rate, means that the medication or the handling didn't work. What else do we need? Well, not only do you need something to compare your snakes to, we also need to make sure that we eliminate as many other variables that we're not trying to test as possible. So for instance, my snakes here are all kept in tubs on paper. Your snakes are kept in a different climate, probably with heat mats. You'll use substrate, a whole heap of different variables that could potentially affect the behaviour of the snake. So I can't compare my snakes to your snakes. We need to compare my snakes to my snakes because all of those variables are eliminated. What we can do in the video is for you guys to compare my snakes to your snakes and see whether you see some of the same behaviours. If you do, bear in mind that there are a number of additional variables that could affect the behaviour of your snakes. It's up to you to try and figure out what that might be and try to account for that.
Okay guys, I just want to show this quick video. You've seen this many times before, but I want to set the base level for this handling experiment. All of my hatchlings, when I say they are unhandled, get this opportunity. When they are cleaned out, they are typically unsettled because there's a poo in the tub and they don't like it. So generally they're awake if they need a full refresh, and they all get this opportunity to come out and free roam. I do not handle them. I don't touch them. They're allowed to roam wherever they want on the table, and generally they don't need much correction from me. I do have to manoeuvre them, of course, because I'm cleaning their tubs, but the handling part is minimal. But I just wanted to clarify that the base level would be hatchlings that have all been given this opportunity. Not necessarily handled, but allowed to free roam. And that's quite important in this experiment, and I'll come back to why that is a little bit later in the video, but I just wanted to clarify what our base level is. What is the standard that we are using to judge any other developments in our snakes, any other observations, either positive or negative, that handling causes? This is the base standard that we're using to compare against. Another useful tip for all you guys that want to do this free roaming and you're having trouble getting your snakes to actually come out by themselves. Again, we'll look at the science behind that a little bit later in the video, but what I do here, you can see that I've moved the tub close to the IKEA paper rack, which we know the snakes find attractive. So I just move the tub closer to the rack, give them the opportunity to explore the scents, and they will come out. The other thing you can do, I'm still cleaning around this snake, so he is being habituated to my movement around him, which means that they're not shy and fearful when I do move around. But a dirty tub from another snake on the table appears to be of great interest to all the snakes, so that's another thing that you could use to encourage your snakes to come out and free roam. You can see it doesn't actually take very long for this snake to come out and start exploring, so I will have the opportunity to refresh his tub without even touching this guy. It just needs 5 or 10 minutes longer than it would normally need to clean this one tub, but it doesn't stop me from cleaning other snakes, and it doesn't stop me from continuing my morning rounds checking which snakes need to be cleaned, because the majority of them actually don't. So no big deal in terms of time. You just need to give this individual snake just a few minutes to come out of the tub by itself, and then I will refresh his tub. So there's another useful tip on what I do, and it avoids actually having to touch the snake. So there we go, this guy's tub has now been refreshed, and he's still out on the IKEA rack and has not actually been physically touched at this point. What I believe that this free roaming does is, number one, it provides sensory stimulation for the baby snake. It gets an opportunity to smell stuff. But as it's smelling stuff, it gives the snake an ability to display adaptive behaviours, conditional responses based upon some of the scents that it smells, rather than just straight innate behaviour. So when you do this, there is actually some benefit to the snake. And we can also, at the same time, because I'm still moving around in the room, the snake will automatically become accustomed to my movement and will not flinch. There are no unusual scents in the room, there's nothing threatening that the snake will not have encountered before, so they tend not to react to it. If their senses are focused on all the scent that's available to them, they will be overwhelmed. So what tends to happen is that over time, all the background scents that are in the room, which includes me, is generally ignored. And that frees them up to focus on new stuff, like this IKEA paper rack, for instance, which is covered in the scent of other snakes, which obviously is something new to them and they find quite fascinating. So what we're seeing here is adaptive behaviours rather than instinctive behaviours, all happening without me actually touching the snake. This is our base level, so not everybody's base level snakes will be at this standard. Many of you will not have tried this, and you're fearful of overhandling your snakes and causing a problem. This is a way to avoid that. You can allow your snakes to get sensory stimulation and to display adaptive behaviours without the damage that overhandling might cause. I think the level of stress that this causes, related to a snake being out during the day in bright lights with me standing over it and filming it with a camera, all of that is actually minimal. These snakes very quickly treat that as part of their normal background that requires no attention from them. That would be quite normal in adaptive behaviours from any snake. One of the goals that we set ourselves with this experiment was to produce snakes which are not shy and fearful. And again, that's highly subjective. This snake is not shy and fearful of coming out of his tub, but perhaps if I picked him up, he would be shy and fearful of being handled. The objective is to have a snake that is not shy and fearful and will tolerate some degree of handling. And I think I've already demonstrated on some of the earlier videos that that is actually entirely possible. We can interact with this snake and pick it up during this free roaming. There we go, now I've got a better grip on it. We can actually interact with this snake during this free roaming without really causing it any additional stress. In fact, I think the snake actually doesn't realise that it's being picked up. Now I do need to put this guy away, so obviously I would have needed to have picked it up at some stage anyway. So this is a minimal amount of handling for our base level snake. There he goes back into his tub, and I'll now stick him back into the rack. So you can see how much handling that involved. I could have actually done it with less handling, but I just wanted to show you guys that you can actually pick these snakes up without them reacting badly to it, even in our base level snakes. So how does a snake learn? How does it modify or adapt its behaviour? The first mechanism to talk about would be habituation. This is where a repeated stimulus causes an innate reaction not to occur anymore. This is when a snake would submit to handling. Frequent handling causes it to stop flinching, stop fighting. It basically surrenders. It is completely desensitized. The problem with habituation is that the innate behavior is not replaced by anything else. It is just suppressed. It also suppresses other behaviors that may not be immediately apparent after we have habituated or desensitized our snake to whatever stimulus we have chosen, such as handling. So habituation is quite stressful on the snake, and one of the first symptoms that we're actually doing damage by repeated handling would be your snake refusing to eat. So habituation is something that we need to avoid. The next mechanism is operant conditioning. I like to call this adaptive behavior. This is where a certain application of an innate behavior has either a positive or negative reinforcement, so the animal can choose whether to do it or not. It doesn't do it all the time, but the innate behavior is not replaced. It is still capable of doing it. A prime example of this would be, for instance, your snake setting up an ambush position and using that ambush position repeatedly because it's been successful there. It has caught prey there before, so it's likely to do it again. Adaptive behavior also includes flinching when you open the tub. Once we open the tub a few times, the snake adapts to that condition and no longer flinches. It is still capable of flinching, but it chooses not to do it because it's happened so many times before and nothing bad happens. So opening a tub, your snake will eventually get used to that and choose not to flinch. It may, however, still flinch if you open the tub somewhat harshly. So operant conditioning or adaptive behavior is something that we want to see in our snakes when we handle. We want our snake to retain the capability of flinching and recoiling, but we want it to choose not to do it. We don't want to habituate or desensitize. We want the snake to adapt and choose not to do it. The third way of learning would be complex problem solving, which involves a number of linear actions that may not necessarily result in success. The animal must be able to remember what it's done so that it can recall in the future whether that series of actions was successful or not. Really smart animals can remember what they did and modify that behavior to suit certain circumstances. Lots of higher animals and birds are capable of this, but this behavior is somewhat problematic in our snakes. I do have an example of a very low-level complex problem solving that snakes will fail, but I've also seen scientific experiments where snakes can actually differentiate between a lit light bulb and one that is not lit and press the correct light bulb in order to obtain a reward. So here's an example of very low level complex problem solving. You can see this female free roaming has gone down onto the lid of the bin and she stuck her head through the handle, and she realizes that she cannot squeeze her body through the handle and she backs out. She would never have encountered this problem before, but she handles the solution pretty well. It's very common in nature for snakes to, for instance, go through a gap into a chicken coop, eat all the chickens, and then not be able to squeeze out back through the same gap. They're not very good at projecting outcomes or complex problem solving. If you could imagine a human being that was trying to figure out if the sofa would fit through the door, they would be measuring it up, they'd be eyeballing it, they'd be looking, they'd be twisting the sofa into different orientations to make sure that that sofa would actually fit through the door before they even tried to get it through. That is complex problem solving. Many animals have this ability to predict the outcome of a certain series of linear actions For instance, birds can figure out how to pull a pin that opens a latch that enables them to undo the handle of the door and release the food. Many other animals have that ability. Snakes, I have not seen any good evidence to suggest that snakes can do this at anything other than a very basic level. Okay, maybe I was wrong about complex behaviours. The snake here is logged on to Tinder and is looking for a date for the night. Joking aside, it's awesome to see other people trying this free roaming. Outstanding. Okay, for the purposes of this study, we're going to be concerned mainly about the difference between habituation and adaptation. We want our snakes to choose whether or not to use an existing innate behavior such as flinching when we handle, and choose not to do it rather than be desensitized and inhibited from doing it. Complex behaviors beyond the scope of what I think we can achieve with this experiment.
When we perform experiments, it's important to have benchmarks or criteria that we can measure in order to see how our snakes are progressing. We need to have a score. Again, very, very subjective when it comes to behaviours. I handle my snakes, so my snakes are better. Better in what way? How do we measure that? Well, we're going to use, again, criteria which are possibly subjective, and what I'll talk about later in the video is what I have used to try to compare snakes. And when snakes are young, and we're dealing with hatchlings here, when they are young, most of their behaviour is innate or instinctive, and as they gain in experience and confidence, some of that innate behaviour is replaced by adaptive or conditional behaviour. So for instance, they may stop flinching because they've become accustomed to being handled. There is no threat, so they don't flinch when they're picked up. They still retain the capability to flinch, but they don't do it. So flinching might be one criteria that we use, and there are a whole heap of other criteria as well, which I'll talk about later in the video. So this is the video that I perhaps should have made before I started this handling series. Let's talk a little bit about confirmation bias. This is seeing what you want to see, and it's always a temptation when you have seen something one or two times to see it again and to think it's the same thing. That's confirmation bias. Now, about 8 years ago, I started working very closely with ARP constrictors. ARP constrictors is the biggest breeder in Malaysia. His collection is about 350 strong, and he sees about 100 to 120 clutches a year. And you will have seen many of those babies' egg cuttings on my earlier videos. That amounts to somewhere around 800 hatchlings a year, which I see go off to new owners, owners that want pets, breeders, new breeders, and I see those snakes in the shop, and you can cram an awful lot of experience into 800 hatchlings a year. Now that sample set is still biased because I usually just get to see the problem ones. The ones that go off to new homes and don't have problems, you never hear about again. You always hear about the ones that stop eating, the ones that get sick, the ones that get brought back to the shop, the owners that need help getting their snakes eating, and it's almost invariably exactly the same things that cause those issues. It's overhandling, and it is poor husbandry, not giving the snakes enough security in the accommodation that they're kept in and disturbing them too much. And that is a very common theme. I've also been doing YouTube for about 2 or 3 years now and producing snake videos, and as my subscriptions have grown, I do get a lot of private messages, people asking for help. Usually it's with identification of snakes, it's with breeding issues, but it's also issues with snakes that will not eat. And also I get to share in everybody's success when they actually text me to say thanks for the help, it worked, I've got my first clutch of eggs. So I do get a lot of feedback through social media on people's problems with snakes. So there's that. Because I've worked quite closely with Arwen at ARP Constrictors, it also gives me access to a lot of private collections throughout Southeast Asia. For instance, we've visited Indonesia and seen a number of other people's collections, and I've seen a lot of collections here in Malaysia. What that has shown me is that most collections of ball pythons, all the ball pythons within a reasonable range, are all exactly the same. They all end up in the same place, behaving the same way. They're all typical ball pythons, regardless of how they are treated. If they are mistreated, they're more shy and fearful, but generally they all reach about the same place. I have yet to meet a collection of ball pythons where I have thought, wow, these are super snakes. These behave so much differently, so much better than mine, that whatever this guy is doing in his collection, I need to do it too. In fact, I have never seen a collection of ball pythons that are any better than mine. I've seen many that are worse. So again, in terms of this experiment, my experience is that all ball pythons, regardless of how they are treated, usually end up roughly the same as adults. And there is a good scientific reason why that is the case. It's because ball pythons' behaviour is typically a lot of innate or instinctive behaviours modified by hormones. These hormones could be stress hormones, these hormones could be breeding hormones, but their behaviour and their tolerance at any particular time of year is related to their hormonal cycles. It's not related to anything to do with us. So again, for the purposes of this experiment, all ball pythons end up approximately the same. What we hope to see by a little bit of handling is probably the best we can hope for is accelerated adaptive behaviours. We can help speed up our snake's development, but we cannot turn them into super snakes. Regardless of how quickly they learn, they all end up in the same place.
So given that behaviour is such a subjective thing, I've put together this little chart here to show what I consider to be progress and how we might potentially measure it. So if we start on the left hand side with our hatchling, most of its behaviors are going to be innate or instinctive behavior. And as the snake gets older, it progresses along this orange line and adapts, and we start to see more and more conditional or adaptive responses. And this would be an improvement in the behavior of our snakes. Now, if by handling or free roaming, for instance, we can accelerate this development and the snake shows more adaptive behaviors earlier in its life, that would be a success. The end point, I think, is going to be the same. My experience is there are no collections out there that have snakes in them that are so much better than my snakes that it makes me go, wow. There's no super snakes out there. So I do not think that our accelerated curve of development is going to end up producing super snakes. It's just going to end up with our snakes reaching the same point, but possibly quicker. And that is subjective. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit here about another experiment. This is a very popular paper that's often quoted, and it's a study on ball pythons kept in tubs and terrariums. But it is an example of how progress has to be defined by specific criteria. And here is the criteria that experiment has used. And you can see a number of behaviors that we can actually measure. We can look at our snakes and quantify what behaviors they're actually performing and whether we see this as an improvement. So there's an example of how experimental criteria and results need to be quite clearly defined. Otherwise, they're merely subjective. Now, we do know an additional factor in our snakes that causes a significant behavioral change, and that is stress. Stress from faulty husbandry, stress from the things that we do to our snakes, which includes handling. So in this experiment, we have our snakes at a baseline stress, which is the green line. We have a stress level that would inhibit certain behaviors, and then we have a threshold stress level where they're so stressed they actually stop eating. So if we take our hatchlings and our control subjects at their baseline stress level and we follow the blue dashed curve, we have handling events 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you can see that we rest the snake between periods of handling so that its stress levels can recover. And you'll see that we don't actually reach a point in this handling exercise where the snake actually starts to exhibit behavioral inhibition. I think we can all see that keeping the stress hormone levels below the level where behavior is inhibited is a good idea, and we simply achieve that by less frequent handling and longer rest periods. If we look at the other extreme, where we have the red dotted line and we have handling events at 1, 2, 3, 4, very, very quickly with that frequency of handling, you can see that the snake's stress levels very quickly get into the zone of behavioral inhibition. The snake is still eating, but if we continue to handle events 5, 6, and 7, we're not allowing the snake to recover between these handling periods, and we very quickly reach a threshold stress level where our snake stops eating. So the whole point of this exercise is to keep our snakes between the green and the orange line, but unfortunately with our hatchling we appear to have pushed it up to or somewhere close to the red threshold level, and it has actually stopped eating, and we now need to bring that snake back to a level where it's going to start eating again. In terms of this experiment, if we handle too frequently, the red dotted line there, you can see that behavioral inhibition is going to prevent progress or even cause the snake to regress in its development towards more adaptive or conditional behaviors where we want our snake to be. So we're hoping that a little bit of handling can accelerate the snake's progress. We need to be very cognizant and cautious of the fact that overhandling or overstressing the snake can actually cause behavior regression and actually make the snake shy and fearful, so that it actually prevents it from developing conditional or adaptive responses. I see free roaming and the stuff you've seen me do with my snakes as a great way to accelerate a snake's development without the risk of additional stress caused by handling.
Some would say that I actually do handle my snakes, And yes, I do interact with them while they're free roaming. I have so many snakes that they don't all get to come out every single day. It's actually quite limited. And you've seen how my snakes behave and respond to that. I don't actually see any adverse reaction to being handled. One of the criteria we set ourselves was that they don't flinch and they don't react badly to handling, and I think you've seen that my snakes, despite not being handled, actually do respond quite well to it. They tolerate it very well. I've also shown with the terrarium experiment here that my snakes are extremely adaptable and will switch from tubs to terrariums without any difficulty, and that was another of the handling criteria that we set ourselves. So my snakes already meet that criteria without me actually having to do anything extra. The free roaming takes up very little time and is extremely flexible, allows me to maintain my collection with very little extra effort but give the snakes some extra stimulus which I feel benefits them in terms of adaptive behaviours. They show more adaptive behaviours during free roaming than you would probably see in tubs or terrariums. So as we go through this handling video, and I do want to continue this handling video with the hatchling, I want to show you that I can bring him back from the brink, having overstressed him through too much handling. The way to do that is to simply leave them alone for a period of time, and I'll show you how well that works. So handling, free roaming, any of the activities that we do with our snakes is somewhat irrelevant. If we consider that their behaviours are controlled by stress, as long as whatever we do with our snakes minimises the amount of stress that they suffer, the snakes will be just fine. If you don't, you're going to encounter problems regardless of whether you handle them or not. Handling can be a source of additional stress. When I actually interact with my snakes during free roaming, I don't think they even realise that they're being picked up, and therefore there is no additional stress. All the adult snakes that you see in this video have never been systematically handled, although you wouldn't know it to look at them.
Any snake will do this. Any snake is fully capable of free roaming without fear, without flinching, even if it is not handled. So here again, this snake is not shy and fearful. It has an opportunity now to learn some more about its surroundings without me actually touching it and without it becoming stressed. And in fact, I actually believe that once a snake reaches this condition, that we can, you see, the snake is not shy and fearful. It doesn't even recognise that it's being picked up. I am actually trying to redirect it here back onto the table. It seems to be interested in the rack, and I don't want it to go there, so I am trying to redirect it. I'm not doing it forcefully, and I'm not restraining the snake, and the snake just doesn't care. I'm fairly certain that under these circumstances the snake does not realise that it's even been picked up. So I do not consider this as handling. This is part of free roaming. Now this girl is going down here again. This is a female. So again, I'm going to redirect her. And there's no flinching, there's no fear. She just wants to get back to the rack, wherever it is she wants to go. She's got a mind set on that, and she doesn't really care about me. So there is no actual adverse response to me, because I'm pretty certain she doesn't even realise that I'm here. Now she can feel some resistance, and she's fighting me because you see she's hooked her head around there. So now I am actually going to use some form of restraint.
Okay, some form of restraint to stop her from going in the rack, but you can see she's not in the least bit bothered by that. Even though she's not accustomed to being handled, I think the ideal situation here is that she doesn't actually realise. Go girl, this is absolutely awesome. Do your thing. Very difficult to film because she's actually crawling up my arm and she's getting very close to me, so I'll try and get her to go back on the table so we can actually get a look at the snake again. Okay, there she goes, and she's going to go back to the rack. That's where she wants to go. So again guys, I'm going to say that I do not actually class this as handling. This is still free roaming. We're allowing a snake an opportunity to explore, if you want to use that word. And there she goes, she's straight back to whatever it is that interests her over here. I'm not going to be able to distract her from that, and me handling her makes absolutely no difference. This is a snake that was being cleaned, so had to be taken out. I put her onto the IKEA paper rack, and I did have to do that manually because I wanted to, that's the last tub that I need to clean, and I wasn't actually intending to shoot this video, but it's a good opportunity to illustrate just what our snakes are capable of, whether we handle them or not. My question to all you guys that handle your snakes is this actually handling? I don't believe that it is. The snake is not being restrained. It fights me back when I try to redirect it, but I don't class this as... Oh no, I'm going to have to do this again now. Come on. There we go. So I am actually redirecting, but you can see how focused this girl is on what it is that she is interested in. She's not focused on me at all. I may as well not be here. She just wants to go where she wants to go. Oh, so we'll put her back on the table. There we go. And you can see exactly where she's headed back towards. She will not be put off by me. And she isn't responding to me at all. She doesn't even flinch when I redirect her. Go on girl, have a bit of a climb on there. Okay, now I am watching this girl quite closely because I'm actually looking for adverse reactions or signs that this girl is not responding well to, and I'm still touching her here, but that's incidental. And I'm watching for signs that this girl is actually being affected by me handling her, and I still think that she doesn't even realise, she doesn't care. But remember guys that this is a snake that gets an opportunity to free roam from time to time, but isn't actually handled. And she's not actually being handled right now, she's just free roaming. The fact that I'm touching her is neither here nor there as far as the snake is concerned. So we do have to be careful about what we mean when we say handling. This opportunity to interact with our snakes, I think many people would call handling. I don't think the snake would call it that. The snake doesn't care and probably doesn't even realise. But that's also a good thing, right? Because she's not shy and fearful of me. I'll try and get my belly out of the way here so that she can crawl up. Hello girl.
So what is it that we expect from our snakes in handling that this girl is not actually providing for us? And this is a snake that, let me put her on the table and she'll go straight back to where it was she wanted to go to before. Very single-minded. But this is a snake that's not handled. I don't generally handle my snakes at all anymore because I don't really see the need for it. I don't see any improvement in my snakes by handling them, although I will interact with them during free roaming like this. I don't actually see what we're getting, what we're gaining. There she goes again, very single-minded. There's something in this rack that she really wants to get to. And again, I can redirect, and she doesn't even realise that she's being picked up. So, from this girl's behaviour, can anybody tell me what it is we're looking for in a snake that's handled versus a snake like this one that has not been handled but is obviously far too preoccupied to worry about that? Go. So here, I think, my goodness me, this girl is determined. And now she's going to have to be, she's hooked herself under, so I'm going to have to use two hands here, guys. Okay, so we managed to dig her out there, and I'm going to put this girl back now. And there she goes. I'm not forcing her back into her tub. Her tub has been refreshed, but I'm just offering her the security of her tub, which clearly she doesn't actually want. She wants to come out again. My goodness me. And look at that, guys, for a snake that is never handled. Come on, go back into your tub. I'm done cleaning. No, don't go in there. Come on. Come on. I need you to go back in there. That's it. Off you go. No, 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 no. And finally, there she goes. This is not a one-off. Here's a couple of yearling females that are displaying exactly the same behaviour, and they're also extremely tolerant to handling, despite the fact they've never been handled before. I believe what's happening here, because it's the females that now want to come out and do the free roaming, is a behavioural trait that is controlled by breeding hormones. This has nothing to do with us. This is a seasonal change in hormones that dictate the way that a snake behaves, and that includes its tolerance towards being handled by us. At this time of year, I've shown you how the males behave in a very different way. Again, also controlled by hormones. And if you get a chance to watch the terrarium update, you'll see some things in the terrarium girl also that I believe are controlled by hormones. Alright guys, our little male has just shed. I need to refresh his tub. You can see the shed in there. And I'm just going to leave this guy for 5 or 10 minutes to see whether I can actually tempt him to come out. He was asleep, he wasn't moving around, so I'm guessing he won't come out, and I'm not going to push it. Beautiful animal. Okay, so it's taken him about 5 minutes, but he is actually now starting to move around. The only reason that I'm doing this is because he needs cleaning out anyway, and I would prefer him to come out of the tub by himself so that I can put the refreshed stuff back into his tub without actually touching him. So I wouldn't normally touch him at all. I would just leave him be, because this guy's confidence has taken a knock and we do not want to add any additional stress here. So let's wait a few more minutes and see whether he comes out, but I do not want this to be a handling session. He can free roam if he's confident enough to come out, but I would like him to vacate the tub so that I can get in there and refresh it before I put him back in the rack and leave him alone again. So it has been about a week since I handled this guy, and he has now shed. And here we go, guys. The IKEA paper rack is doing its usual trick, and this guy is actually coming out and scenting the IKEA paper rack. They just can't help themselves. And he's taking a drink out of the water jug. I have refreshed his water. It was a little bit dirty, but he's taking the opportunity to have a drink, which is just awesome. This is taking an incredibly long time. I'm standing well back here and trying my best not to move and to give this guy the confidence to come out, but he keeps reversing back into his tub. He just does not want to come out. His confidence is building. I'll give him a little while, but he keeps doing that, just pulling back into his tub. So his tub is not particularly dirty, so I might just end up having to put the paper back on top of him and stick the water bowl back in there and put him back in the rack. As I said, I do not want to handle this guy. I want to give him more time for his stress levels to reduce, but certainly his confidence is way down at the moment. Very cute. So we'll persist just a little while longer, but this is taking quite some time. Alright guys, so I did end up just putting the paper down on top of him. He would not come out. So there he is under the paper, and I have not disturbed him. So he is refreshed, he's got new water. I'll put the lid on the tub and we'll put him back, and I'll keep you updated on progress in a few days' time. So cleaning of the hatchlings a couple of days later. I have not touched our designated guy, but a couple of snakes wanted to come out and free roam, so they got the opportunity to do it. It's feeding day tomorrow, and I have no concerns whatsoever about these guys eating. They're behaving confidently, they do not appear stressed. It's just the wrong damn snakes. The snake that we'd chosen to handle in the hopes that it would speed up its development and make it more confident has actually stopped eating, while these guys, who I've given no special treatment to, no handling at all, just an opportunity to free roam, these guys are going great guns. These guys are doing exactly what we'd hoped that our candidate snake would do. Here's something interesting. In that paper on tubs versus terrariums, they claim that terrarium snakes are not interested in cameras, that only tub snakes are interested in cameras. That simply isn't true. We've seen from my terrarium snakes that they are disturbed by cameras, and these free roaming snakes are also very attracted to cameras. It's an observation that I've made many times before. Ball pythons are attracted to cameras. Here there's a little bit of an interaction. The lavender albino is the more confident of the two, and the fire cinnamon freezes in place. They don't actually touch each other during this interaction. And whilst I do not normally handle snakes during free roaming, this lavender albino girl actually crossed the gap onto my knee and started crawling across my body. And so she did get handled. I have to pick her up to put her back on the table anyway. But you can see that despite the fact that she's never been handled, she's completely distracted by the free roaming and is not flinching, is not hiding her head. She's just doing her thing. And whilst many of my hatchlings were actually active this morning, the guy that we've chosen for handling is not moving, so I left him in his rack there. It is feeding day tomorrow, so we'll see whether we can get him to eat or not. But this is the guy that we expected to see progress, and this is the guy that's not doing what we want him to do. So I think it's pretty clear that forced handling, when you lift snakes out of their tub purposely to handle them, is not a good idea. The other snakes that haven't had this treatment are actually progressing far faster. So we need to bring this guy back to lower stress levels and get him to do this as well. Feeding night, guys, and all the hatchlings are absolutely hot to trot. So we're going to try feeding the selected hatchling tonight to see whether he eats, but everything else is eating ravenously. You can see no hesitation whatsoever from the other hatchlings. And that of course includes the one that was being free roamed. This is the cinnamon fire that you saw being free roamed, and he is frantic to eat. So there you go, guys, no hesitation at all there. Okay, so it looks like they're all ready to eat, including this boy, the chosen one. So let's feed these three. No hesitation from the first pastel Enchi clown. He went for it as soon as it went in the tub. And the second pastel Enchi boy, also eaten without hesitation. And you can see that this boy is also hot to trot. It would seem that he is quite keen to eat. So I'm thinking he's back. Let's just feed him. Bingo. No hesitation, this boy has eaten. He's back. If these series of videos do nothing else, I want to clear up the myth that number one, we need to handle our snakes to tame them down.
That is simply untrue. And number two, that our snakes actually enjoy being handled. They seek it out, and that is also patently untrue. Okay guys, that's an update on the handling video. I am going to continue this experiment. I disagree strongly with the suggestion that there's nothing to be learned. I think there's an awful lot to be learned. Just compare them to your own. If you like what you see, some of the things that I do are different to the things that you do. You can try them out in your own collections. It's not my intention to try to show you that handling is or is not beneficial in your own collections with your own snakes. In addition to that, it might also be beneficial to you. If it's beneficial to you and does no harm to the snakes, that's a good enough reason for doing it. Okay guys, so stay tuned for the next one. We'll follow the progress of this guy here and see how he does. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to share, like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.